Tonight, allow this peaceful Bible story to quiet your thoughts and bring rest to your soul. Let your breathing slow as calm settles gently over you. Long ago, in a distant land called Uz, there lived a man named Job. The land of Uz lay far from the great cities and royal courts. It was a place of wide skies and open ground, where the days unfolded at a gentle pace, and life followed the steady rhythms of nature. The air was often still, and the land itself seemed suited for quiet reflection. In this calm setting, Job built his life, not in haste or ambition, but with care, patience, and reverence. Job was known throughout the land as a man of great substance. He possessed many flocks and herds, servants who worked faithfully, and fields that yielded their produce in season. Yet his prosperity did not bring restlessness or pride. His household moved with order and purpose, each task performed in its proper time. Mornings began with the soft sounds of daily labour, and evenings settled into peaceful rest. There was no sense of excess or indulgence, only sufficiency and gratitude for what had been given. Within Job's home, there was a deep atmosphere of thankfulness. Meals were shared with quiet appreciation, and the simple act of gathering together carried a sense of blessing. The household was not ruled by fear or harshness, but by fairness and kindness. Servants were treated with dignity, and their loyalty grew naturally from the respect they received. In every corner of the home, there was a sense that life was ordered and meaningful, guided by wisdom rather than force. Job's devotion to God shaped every part of his daily life. He feared God and turned away from evil, not only in public acts but in the hidden thoughts of the heart. His faith was not loud or showy. It was steady and sincere, expressed through obedience and humility. Each day Job remembered that his blessings were not earned by his own strength alone, but were gifts entrusted to him. This understanding kept his heart grounded and his spirit calm. As the days passed, Job remained mindful of his responsibility not only to manage his wealth, but to guard his integrity. He was careful in his dealings, honest in his words, and thoughtful in his judgments. When disputes arose, he listened before speaking. When decisions were required, he sought wisdom rather than advantage. His reputation grew quietly, not because he sought honour, but because righteousness has a way of being noticed even when it's practiced in silence. At the centre of this household was Job's wife, whose presence shaped the home in ways that were gentle yet essential. She managed the daily workings of the household with care, ensuring that order was maintained and needs were met. Her hands were busy, yet her spirit carried the weight of deep responsibility. She was the mother of their children, and her days were filled with tending, teaching, and guiding them as they grew. She watched over the household as one who understood its rhythms. She knew when the stores were full and when they needed replenishing. She ensured that meals were prepared, garments were cared for, and the household moved smoothly from day to night. Her labour often went unseen beyond the walls of the home, yet it formed the quiet foundation upon which everything else rested. As a mother, she bore both joy and concern in her heart. She watched her children grow into adulthood, each with their own nature and path. There were moments of laughter and celebration, as well as moments of reflection and prayer. She understood the fragile nature of life and the deep bond that ties a parent to a child. Her love was woven into the daily fabric of the household, steady and enduring. Together, Job and his wife shared a life shaped by both responsibility and blessing. Their partnership was rooted in shared experience and mutual dependence. They had known years of growth and abundance, and through it all, their household remained anchored in stability. Faith was not something distant or abstract within their home. It was lived out quietly through daily choices, careful words, and humble gratitude. As evening settled over the land of Uz, the household often grew still. The sounds of labour faded, and lamps were lit as darkness approached. In these quiet hours there was peace. The future felt secure, the present felt sufficient, and the past was remembered with thankfulness. Nothing yet disturbed the calm order of their days. Life moved gently forward, resting in a balance that seemed unshakable, as the world of Job remained whole and undisturbed. In those days, the blessing that rested upon Job's household could be felt without being announced. It showed itself quietly in the way each day unfolded with enough, and no more than enough. The fields produced what was needed. The flocks multiplied steadily, not wildly. Supplies were sufficient for the household and for those who depended upon it. Nothing felt hurried, and nothing felt strained. Abundance existed, yet it never ruled the heart or distracted the mind. There was no pursuit of excess within the household. Wealth was not displayed for admiration, nor was it used to elevate one person above another. What Job possessed was treated as a trust rather than a trophy. Each resource had its place and purpose. Grain was stored carefully. Animals were tended patiently. Tools were maintained with care. This quiet stewardship allowed abundance to remain gentle, never overwhelming the spirit of the home. Family life moved according to simple and dependable rhythms. Days began with light and purpose. Tasks were shared, and each member of the household knew their role. There was comfort in routine, not boredom. Children grew accustomed to order, learning through example how life could be lived with steadiness and respect. Voices within the home were rarely raised, for there was little need for correction when peace governed the atmosphere. Faith was woven naturally into daily life, not separated from ordinary moments. It was present in the way decisions were made and in the patience shown during small inconveniences. Gratitude was expressed quietly rather than proclaimed loudly. Blessings were acknowledged as gifts rather than assumed rights. This shared understanding shaped the household into a place where reverence lived alongside daily work. Job's concern for righteousness extended beyond his own heart and into the lives of his children. When seasons of gathering and celebration passed among them, he remained mindful of their spiritual well-being. In his wisdom, he understood that joy can sometimes lead the heart astray without intention. Because of this, Job rose early at appointed times to offer burnt offerings according to the number of his children, saying in his heart that perhaps they had sinned or spoken wrongly before God. These offerings were not made out of suspicion or fear, but out of care. Job did not accuse his children, nor did he burden them with heavy words. Instead, he carried their spiritual welfare before God quietly and faithfully. This practice became part of the household rhythm, a gentle expression of responsibility and devotion. In this way, faith was not only taught, but carried lovingly on behalf of others. Within the home, gratitude shaped both speech and silence. When meals were shared, they were received with thankful hearts. When days passed without trouble, those days were not taken for granted. Even the absence of hardship was seen as a gift worth acknowledging. This posture of reverence created a deep sense of peace that settled over the household like a steady breath. Job's wife moved through these days with awareness and care. She observed the calm that surrounded her family and guarded it with quiet diligence. Her actions reflected the same spirit of gratitude that shaped her husband's life. She understood that abundance could be fleeting and that stability required attention. Through her watchfulness, the household remained balanced and well-ordered. The children of Job also lived within this shelter of peace. They gathered together at appointed times, sharing meals and moments of joy. Their relationships were marked by familiarity and ease. There was laughter among them and a sense of belonging that brought comfort. They knew their home as a place of safety, where provision was reliable and love was steady. This sense of stability reached beyond the walls of the house and into the surrounding land. Those who passed by recognized Job's household as one marked by fairness and calm. It was not feared, nor was it envied openly. It was respected. Stability had become its quiet testimony. As days continued without interruption, there was no sign of what lay ahead. Nothing in the order of the household hinted at coming change. The fields remained fertile. The animals remained healthy. The family remained united. Life moved forward with a sense of quiet assurance, as though the foundation beneath them would remain forever firm. In this season the household rested in a rare balance. Blessing did not weigh heavily upon them, nor did responsibility feel burdensome. Safety seemed certain, and the future appeared secure. Each night closed gently upon the land of Uz, carrying with it the calm confidence of a life untouched by loss, held steady by gratitude, reverence, and peace. Beyond the quiet order of the land of Uz, beyond fields and households and the measured passing of days, there was a realm unseen by human eyes. In that place, events unfolded without noise or spectacle, governed by purpose rather than impulse. It was there that a moment arose which would touch the life of Job, though nothing on earth yet showed a sign of change. The sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, as they had done before. Among them was the adversary, who also came in their midst. There was no turmoil in this gathering, no sense of threat or urgency. The exchange that followed was calm and deliberate, spoken with clarity rather than force. The Lord spoke first, asking where the adversary had come from. The answer was simple and unadorned. He had been going to and fro on the earth, walking back and forth upon it. The words carried no accusation and no haste, only the acknowledgement of movement and observation. Then the Lord spoke of Job. He described him plainly, yet with purpose. There was no one like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who feared God and turned away from evil. This was not a challenge spoken in pride, but a statement of truth. God's confidence in Job rested on the reality of Job's life, known fully and seen clearly. The adversary responded by questioning the nature of Job's faith. He suggested that Job feared God because of the protection and blessing placed around him. He spoke of the hedge that surrounded Job, his household, and all that he possessed. He observed that the work of Job's hands had been blessed and that his possessions had increased in the land. The words were measured, but their intent was clear. The suggestion followed quietly. If the protection were removed and the blessing touched, the adversary claimed that Job would curse God. There was no shouting in this moment, no dramatic display. It was a calm assertion rooted in doubt rather than evidence. The Lord answered without hesitation and without alarm. He did not defend Job with argument, nor did he express uncertainty. Instead, he placed a boundary. All that Job had was given into the hand of the adversary, but Job himself was not to be touched. The limit was spoken clearly and firmly. Authority was not surrendered, only permission within restraint. With that boundary set, the exchange ended. The adversary went out from the presence of the Lord, carrying with him the allowance given and the limits imposed. Nothing more was said, nothing more was needed. On earth, life continued unchanged. The household of Job remained unaware of what had been spoken beyond sight and sound. Fields were still tended, meals were still prepared, the rhythms of the home continued without interruption. Yet beneath the surface of ordinary moments, a shift had occurred that could not yet be seen. There was no immediate sign, no sudden disturbance in the air. The stillness that followed was quiet and heavy, though gentle. It was the kind of stillness that lingers before change, not marked by fear, but by the absence of warning. The sky above the land of Uz remained the same. The evenings closed softly, and the nights passed as they always had. Yet the unseen decision now stood between heaven and earth, waiting for its time. The calm that rested upon Job's life was still present, but it had become delicate, like a flame that burns steadily just before a breath passes nearby. Nothing had yet been taken. Nothing had yet been shaken. But the boundary had been drawn, and permission had been given. The world of Job remained outwardly whole, resting in a silence that carried more weight than before as the unseen prepared to touch the seen. The change came quietly, not as a storm announced from afar, but as a series of moments that arrived one after another. The day began as many days had before it. Work moved forward in familiar ways, and nothing in the morning air suggested what would soon unfold. A messenger came first, breathless and shaken. He spoke of the oxen that had been ploughing and the donkeys grazing nearby. Raiders had fallen upon them suddenly and carried them away. The servants who tended them were struck down, and only one remained to tell what had happened. The words settled heavily, yet before they could fully be received, another voice arrived. This second messenger spoke of fire falling from the sky, consuming the sheep and the servants who watched over them. Again, only one had escaped. The losses were spoken plainly, without detail beyond what was necessary. Possessions that had been tended with care were gone in a moment, taken without warning. While the sound of that message still lingered, a third arrived. Bands had formed and swept through the land, taking the camels and striking the servants. Once more, a single survivor remained. The sequence of loss unfolded without pause, each report layering weight upon the last. What had taken years to build was being removed within a single day. Then came the final messenger. His voice carried a different tone, slower and heavier. He spoke of Job's sons and daughters gathered together in their eldest brother's house, sharing food and drink as they often did. A great wind had come from across the wilderness and struck the corners of the house. The structure collapsed and all the children were gone. No one remained to escape. The words did not rush forward. They rested in the air, complete and final. The meaning needed no explanation. The house that had once echoed with life was silent, and the joy that had filled it was gone. Job rose from where he stood. There was no cry recorded, no accusation spoken. He tore his robe and shaved his head, signs of deep mourning known to the people of the land. Then he fell to the ground. His body lowered itself, not in collapse, but in intention. He bowed. From that place, words came quietly from his mouth. He acknowledged his beginning and his end. He had come into the world with nothing, and he would leave it the same way. He spoke of the Lord who gives and the Lord who takes away. He blessed the name of the Lord, not because the loss was small, but because his reverence had not been taken from him. In all of this, Job did not sin, nor did he charge God with wrongdoing. His grief was real and full, yet it did not turn into bitterness. His faith did not erase his sorrow, but it held him steady within it. Around him, the household grew still. Servants who had once moved with purpose now stood without direction. Tasks were left unfinished. Tools lay where they had been set down. The places where voices once gathered felt empty, and the rooms that had held laughter now held quiet. Job's wife entered into this silence bearing a sorrow beyond words. She had lost her children in a single moment. The life she had built within the walls of that home had been torn away. No record preserves her words in that hour, only the weight of what she endured. Grief settled upon her as it did upon the household, heavy and unrelieved. The land itself seemed unchanged, yet everything within the home had shifted. Wealth that once supported many was gone. Children who had filled the days were no longer present. The future that had felt secure now stood unknown. As night came, there was no comfort to be found in routine. Lamps were lit, but they didn't warm the rooms as before. Food was prepared, but few had the strength to eat. Each person carried their own sorrow, yet it pressed upon them all together. The household remained gathered in quiet. No one spoke words meant to explain or resolve what had happened. There were no answers offered and no conclusions drawn. Grief had taken its place, and the home rested within it, silent and changed, holding loss that could not yet be understood. The silence that filled the house didn't belong to one person alone. It settled between Job and his wife, pressing gently yet firmly upon them both. They remained near one another, not because words were ready to be spoken, but because separation would have made the weight heavier. Their shared loss drew them into the same quiet space, where grief did not need explanation. They mourned together without ceremony. There were moments when neither could lift their eyes, and moments when one would notice the other's presence and draw strength from it. Their sorrow was not identical, yet it was deeply connected. What had been taken from them belonged to them both, bound by years of shared life and love. The home that had once held warmth and movement now felt vast and empty. Rooms that had known the sound of voices and footsteps carried only echoes. Familiar objects remained where they had always been, unchanged and unmoved, yet their meaning had shifted. The absence of their children was felt in every corner, not as a single sharp pain, but as a steady ache that did not lessen. Job's wife carried a sorrow that reached deep into her being. She had borne her children, nurtured them, watched them grow, and now she held the knowledge that they were gone. Her grief was not loud, yet it was complete. It lived in her stillness, in the way her hands rested without purpose, in the way her eyes lingered where her children once stood. As a mother, her loss touched every memory. She remembered small beginnings and long years of care. She remembered laughter and concern, hope and quiet pride. These memories did not leave her. They gathered within her, tender and heavy, filling the spaces that had once been filled by living presence. As a partner, she felt the fracture of the life she'd shared with Job. Together they had built a home marked by order and devotion. Together they had raised a family and watched it flourish. Now they stood within the remains of that shared work, unsure how to carry it forward. The future they had imagined no longer rested before them in clear shape. Job bore his own sorrow with the weight of responsibility and loss. He grieved not only as a father, but as one who had watched over his household with care. The knowledge that everything entrusted to him had been taken pressed heavily upon his heart. Yet even in this he did not withdraw from his wife. Their grief did not divide them. It held them close in mutual understanding. They sat together in long stretches of quiet. No attempt was made to soften the pain with explanations. There were no words that could restore what had been lost. In this silence they allowed grief to exist without resistance. It was not pushed away, nor was it given shape through speech. It simply remained, shared and unspoken. The sorrow that filled the home was not chaotic. It moved slowly, like a deep current beneath still water. There were moments when the weight seemed almost bearable, and moments when it pressed down with renewed force. Neither Job nor his wife sought to measure or compare their pain. Each recognized the other's suffering as real and deserving of space. Night and day passed without distinction. Light came and faded, yet the inner landscape remained unchanged. Sleep did not come easily, and waking brought no relief. Still, they remained present with one another, bound by the quiet truth that grief is often carried better when it is not carried alone. In this shared mourning, there was no resolution and no clarity. There was only endurance. The house stood around them, holding the memory of what had been, while they sat within its walls, learning how to exist in a world that had been altered beyond recognition. Their sorrow did not yet seek meaning or direction. It simply rested with them, heavy and unresolved, waiting in the stillness where words could not reach. Not long after grief had settled into their days, another burden fell upon Job, touching his body as loss had touched his life. Pain came quietly at first, then spread until it could not be ignored. Sores broke out upon his skin, covering him from the soles of his feet to the crown of his head. The discomfort was constant and unrelenting, not sharp and sudden, but deep and wearing. Job sought a place apart from the household. He went out to sit among the ashes, where refuse was cast away and nothing of value remained. There he lowered himself to the ground, surrounded by stillness. The ashes beneath him were cool and lifeless, mirroring the numbness that began to overtake his strength. He took a broken piece of pottery and used it to scrape his skin, seeking brief relief from the irritation that would not leave him. His body weakened under the weight of continuous suffering. Movement became slow and careful. Each change of position required effort. The simple acts of standing or sitting carried discomfort. There was no position that brought ease, only slight differences of pain. His once steady frame now bore the marks of affliction, visible to any who looked upon him. The days passed without relief. Morning brought no renewal and night offered no rest. Sleep came in fragments, broken by discomfort that pulled him back into waking awareness. Time stretched forward slowly, each hour distinct and heavy. There was no sense of progress, only endurance. Job's isolation deepened. He remained apart, not because he wished to be unseen, but because suffering often draws a quiet boundary around the one who bears it. The ashes became his place of waiting. Wind moved lightly across the ground, stirring fine dust that settled again without sound. The world continued around him, yet he remained still within it. His wife watched this new trial unfold before her eyes. She had already known the loss of her children and the collapse of her home. Now she saw the strength of her husband diminish day by day. The sight of his suffering added another weight to her grief, different from before, yet deeply connected to it. She could not ease his pain. No remedy brought healing. No words brought comfort that lasted. She observed the marks upon his skin and the weariness in his posture. Each day she saw the toll taken upon him, and each day she remained without the power to change it. This helplessness pressed upon her as heavily as sorrow itself. She remembered the man he had been, steady and capable, moving through life with calm assurance. Now she saw him seated in ashes, scraping his skin for relief. The contrast was sharp, yet she did not turn away. Her presence remained, even when there was nothing she could offer but witness. The household, already quiet, grew more withdrawn. Servants spoke softly and moved carefully. There was an unspoken awareness that suffering had entered deeply into the life of their master. The air around the ashes felt different, heavy with patience and waiting. Job himself spoke little during these days. His strength was spent on enduring what his body carried. Pain narrowed the focus of each moment. Thought slowed, and attention rested upon the simple task of remaining upright and aware. Even so, his spirit did not yet break. He remained present, breathing and waiting. His wife bore her own silent vigil. She watched the slow passage of time marked not by tasks or seasons, but by the length of his suffering. She measured days by the rising and setting of the sun, and nights by the long hours that passed without rest. Each return to the ashes confirmed that nothing had changed. There was no sense of why this affliction had come. There were no explanations offered. Pain existed without meaning or direction, and both husband and wife stood within it together, though each felt it differently. The shared grief they had carried now took on a new form, layered with the ongoing presence of physical suffering. As days continued, the ashes remained beneath Job, and the stillness remained around him. His body bore the weight of the trial placed upon it, and his wife remained near, carrying the quiet burden of watching someone she loved endure pain without relief. The world did not yet shift or respond. It simply held them within the slow, unbroken passage of discomfort and waiting. As the days stretched on, the weight carried by Job's wife grew heavier than before. Loss had already emptied her home, and now time itself seemed to drain what strength remained. Grief no longer arrived in sharp waves. It settled into her bones, dull and constant, wearing down her spirit through its persistence. Each morning required effort. Each night closed without rest. She had prayed, though no words are recorded. Her prayers rose quietly from a heart that no longer knew how to shape its questions. She waited for relief, for change, for some sign that the suffering would ease. Yet the days answered her with silence. The heavens felt distant, not hostile, but unreachable. The absence of response pressed upon her more heavily than anger ever could. Loneliness surrounded her even when she was not alone. Servants remained nearby and Job was still present, yet the place within her where hope once lived felt empty. She carried her sorrow inward, turning it over again and again, searching for understanding that would not come. The loss of her children had shattered her sense of order. The suffering of her husband now challenged the faith that had once seemed steady. She remembered the life they had lived before, shaped by reverence and care. She remembered days of gratitude and nights of peace. She remembered trusting that faith would shelter them. Now she stood within a reality that did not match those memories. The distance between what had been believed and what was now experienced troubled her deeply. Her struggle was not one of rebellion alone, but of confusion. She had not known faith as something abstract. It had been lived daily, practiced through obedience and trust. Yet suffering had entered without explanation, and faith now felt like a question rather than an anchor. She searched her heart for answers, wondering what purpose could exist in pain that seemed endless. Watching Job suffer day after day deepened this struggle. His body bore sores that did not heal. His strength did not return. Each sunrise revealed him still seated in ashes. She saw no progress, only endurance. Her desire was simple and deeply human. She wanted the suffering to stop. She wanted relief for him and for herself. She longed for an ending to pain, whatever form it might take. This longing grew stronger as time passed. It didn't arise from cruelty, but from exhaustion. Loss had taken her children. Affliction had taken her husband's health. Waiting had taken her patience. What remained felt thin and fragile. She stood at the edge of despair, not because she no longer cared, but because caring had cost her so much. Faith, once a source of comfort, now raised questions she could not quiet. If God was just, why did suffering continue? If righteousness mattered, why was it not rewarded with protection? These thoughts did not come as accusations shouted loud, but as heavy reflections that returned in the quiet hours. Her heart moved between love and frustration, between loyalty and confusion. She did not abandon her husband, nor did she turn away from him. She remained near, even as her understanding faltered. Her presence was steady, though her inner world felt increasingly unstable. There were moments when she looked upon Job and felt the depth of their shared history. Years of life together could not be undone by suffering. Yet there were also moments when the sight of his pain overwhelmed her. The helplessness of watching without the ability to heal or restore pressed her toward the limits of endurance. In this place, her longing took shape. It was not a desire for destruction, but for release. She yearned for suffering to loosen its grip, to cease its relentless hold upon their lives. Whether through change or conclusion, she sought an end to the pain that had consumed everything familiar. She stood between memory and uncertainty, between faith remembered and faith questioned. Her heart did not rest easily in either place. The prayers that once flowed freely now felt strained and incomplete. Silence answered her more often than comfort, yet she remained, bearing the full weight of what she felt. Her struggle was quiet, internal, and deeply human. It unfolded not in dramatic acts, but in the slow wearing away of strength. At the edge of despair, she waited, uncertain of what faith meant now, but unable to release the longing that suffering might somehow come to an end. In the stillness that followed many long days of watching and waiting, the thoughts that had weighed upon Job's wife found their way into words. They did not come suddenly or with force. They rose slowly from a place of deep weariness, shaped by loss that had not eased and pain that had not lifted. She stood near her husband as he remained seated in the ashes, his body marked by suffering and his strength worn thin. The sight before her was one she had carried silently for too long. In that moment her restraint gave way to speech, not as an act of anger, but as an expression of anguish that could no longer remain unspoken. She spoke to Job and asked whether he still held fast to his integrity. The question carried more than its surface meaning. It reflected all she had witnessed and endured. Then she added words that would be remembered and repeated through generations. She told him to curse God and die. These words were few yet heavy. They were not spoken lightly, nor were they formed from cruelty. They came from a heart exhausted by sorrow and confusion. In her understanding, integrity had not brought protection. Faith had not brought relief. Life had become a place of unending pain. Her words reflected a desire for suffering to end, even if the ending itself was feared. The suggestion she voiced did not arise from hatred toward God, but from despair. She had seen no reward for righteousness and no explanation for loss. The God she trusted felt silent, and the silence weighed heavily upon her spirit. In that silence, death appeared to her not as an enemy alone, but as a possible release from agony. Her words revealed the depth of her despair. She had lost her children in a single day. She had lost the security of her home. She now watched the slow decline of the man she loved. Each layer of loss had stripped away another measure of hope. The future held nothing she could recognize or rely upon. In that place, her question emerged from pain rather than intention to harm. She did not shout. There is no record of raised voice or dramatic gesture. The weight of her words lay not in how they were spoken, but in what they revealed. They revealed a soul pushed to its limits, seeking an end to suffering when no other path seemed visible. After her words were spoken, nothing followed immediately. The air around them remained still. Job did not answer at once, and she did not continue. Silence returned, heavier than before. It settled between them, carrying the meaning of what had been said without resolution. That silence held many things. It held her grief, her confusion, and her longing for relief. It held the pain of having spoken words that could not be taken back. It also held the reality that faith, once shared easily, now stood strained beneath the weight of suffering. Job remained seated, and his wife remained near. Neither moved away. The ashes beneath him did not shift. The world around them didn't respond. The moment passed without outward change, yet something within their shared experience had deepened. Her words lingered in the quiet. They were not followed by argument or explanation. They simply existed, spoken and complete. The stillness that followed was not empty. It was filled with the weight of despair and the unanswered questions that had led to those words. In that silence, her anguish remained visible even without speech. She had reached the edge of what she could bear and had voiced the thoughts that sorrow had shaped. The words echoed not because they were harsh, but because they were honest. They reflected the human struggle to reconcile faith with suffering when pain refuses to end. Nothing in that moment resolved her despair. The silence did not comfort her, nor did it condemn her. It simply held the space where her words rested, waiting for what might come next, as both husband and wife remained within the quiet aftermath of what had been spoken. After the silence had rested for a time, Job spoke. His voice did not rise in defense, nor did it carry sharpness. It came from a place worn by pain, yet steadied by conviction that had not been removed. He answered his wife without haste, choosing words shaped by reflection rather than reaction. He told her that she was speaking as one of the foolish women speaks. His words were not an insult, nor were they meant to wound. In the language of his time, foolishness described a turning away from wisdom, not a lack of worth. He addressed the direction of her words, not the depth of her pain. His response remained measured, even as his body continued to suffer. He then asked a question that reached beyond the moment. Should they receive good from God and not receive hardship as well? The question was not posed to silence her, but to anchor himself and her in what he knew to be true. His understanding of God had not been built upon comfort alone. It had been formed through reverence that did not depend on circumstance. In these few words, Job refused to abandon trust. He did not deny his suffering, nor did he pretend that the loss had not broken something within him. Yet he would not allow pain to define the nature of God. His faith did not promise ease. It rested on acknowledgement of God's sovereignty in all seasons. Job accepted both what had been given and what had been taken. He didn't claim to understand the reason for either. Acceptance did not mean approval of suffering, nor did it lessen the weight of grief. It meant that he would not turn his heart against the one he had trusted when life was whole. His reply carried no anger toward his wife. There was no accusation in his tone. He did not dismiss her sorrow or deny the reality of her exhaustion. He spoke as one who understood that grief can distort vision and press the soul toward desperate conclusions. His firmness lay in his refusal to follow her words into despair, not in a rejection of her struggle. In answering her, Job remained seated in ashes, marked by sores and weakness. His body gave no sign of strength, yet his words revealed a steadiness that suffering had not taken away. He did not claim righteousness for himself in that moment. He simply affirmed that God remained God, even when life no longer made sense. The quiet that followed his reply was different from the silence before. It did not erase the pain in the air, but it changed its shape. His words stood gently between them, offering neither solution nor comfort in the ordinary sense. They offered perspective rooted in faith that endured without explanation. His wife heard him. There is no record of her response, only the knowledge that she remained present. Job's answer did not remove her grief, nor did it immediately restore clarity, yet it revealed the path he chose to walk. He would not curse God. He would not surrender trust, even when trust brought no relief. In this exchange, Job did not sin with his lips. His words remained within the boundaries of reverence, even as his life lay in ruin. He didn't speak against God, nor did he claim that God had acted unjustly. He acknowledged hardship as part of the human experience under divine authority. The ashes beneath him remained unchanged. The pain in his body continued. Loss still surrounded the household. Yet something within Job stood firm. His reply reflected a faith that did not depend on outcome, only on acknowledgement of who God is. The moment passed quietly. No declaration followed. No change came immediately. His words rested in the space between husband and wife, neither demanding agreement nor inviting debate. They simply existed as testimony to a heart that would not let go of trust, even when every outward sign suggested that trust had brought only sorrow. In that stillness, Job remained what he had been before loss came upon him, a man who feared God and turned away from evil. Not because life was gentle, but because his reverence did not depend on gentleness. His response marked a boundary he would not cross, spoken calmly, firmly, and without condemnation, as suffering continued to surround them both. The exchange between Job and his wife remained suspended in the quiet, carrying meaning that reached beyond the few words spoken. It revealed a faith placed under weight, pressed by suffering until its true nature became visible. This was not faith tested by small inconvenience, but by loss that touched every part of life. In such testing, belief was no longer abstract. It became something lived moment by moment, either held or released. Job's response showed a faith that endured without explanation. It did not depend on restored comfort or promised relief. It remained rooted in reverence for God as he is, not as one might wish him to be in a moment of pain. This endurance did not remove sorrow, nor did it shield Job from anguish. It simply refused to let suffering define the final word. His wife's words, spoken earlier, revealed another truth that is no less human. They revealed how pain can wear down understanding until hope feels distant and unbearable. Her despair did not arise from indifference or malice. It grew from prolonged exposure to grief without relief. In her, suffering narrowed vision until escape seemed preferable to endurance. Within this contrast, both responses reflected genuine human experience. One response reached towards surrender of trust in order to end pain. The other held on to trust even when pain remained. Neither response came from a place untouched by suffering. Both were shaped by it, though they moved in different directions. Human weakness is not always loud or dramatic. Often it appears quietly, in the form of exhaustion and unanswered questions. Job's wife stood in such weakness, burdened by loss that had stripped her of certainty. Her struggle showed how faith can falter, not because it is false, but because the heart that carries it has been wounded deeply. Job's endurance did not deny this weakness. His reply did not dismiss her pain or question her love. He addressed her words without attacking her character. In this, compassion remained present even in disagreement. He stood firm without hardening his heart. The contrast between despair and endurance is not a simple division between faith and failure. It is a reflection of how differently sorrow can shape the soul. Despair seeks an end to pain at any cost. Endurance accepts pain without surrendering what lies beneath belief. Both arise from suffering. Both reveal the limits of human strength. Compassion rests within this understanding. Compassion recognizes that Job's wife had lost as much as he had, though in different ways. She had lost children, security, and the future she had imagined. She had also lost the sense that faith would protect what mattered most. Her anguish deserved acknowledgement, not condemnation. Compassion also recognizes the cost of Job's endurance. Holding fast to trust did not spare him pain. It required him to remain present within suffering without relief. His strength did not come from immunity to grief, but from a decision to remain faithful even when faith offered no comfort. Together, husband and wife stood within a shared tragedy, responding differently to the same storm. Their exchange did not resolve the tension between pain and belief. It revealed it. It showed how suffering can divide inner responses even among those who share a life and a history of devotion. In this moment, neither was portrayed as distant or uncaring. Both were deeply affected. Both were vulnerable. Their words and silences reflected the complexity of faith lived under pressure. Faith here was not triumphant or serene. It was strained, questioned, and yet still present. The meaning behind their exchange rests in this tension. It invites understanding rather than judgment. It allows room for human weakness while honouring endurance. It acknowledges despair without endorsing it, and affirms faith without denying suffering. In the quiet that followed, compassion held both of them, not as resolution, but as recognition. Two people bound by love and loss, standing on different edges of the same pain, each revealing what it means to be human when faith is tested by suffering that does not quickly pass. Not long after these things, word reached those who'd known Job from afar. 3 friends, each bound to him by shared history and respect, heard of all the trouble that had come upon him. Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite set out from their homes, having agreed together to come and show him sympathy and comfort. As they approached, they saw him from a distance. At first they didn't recognize him. His body bore the marks of suffering, and his strength had faded. When they realized it was Job, they lifted their voices and wept. Each tore his robe, and dust was thrown into the air and fell upon their heads. Their grief answered his without explanation. They came near and sat down with him on the ground. 7 days and 7 nights passed while they remained there. During that time, no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his suffering was very great. The silence they shared was not empty. It carried respect and acknowledgement of pain too deep for speech. Their presence did not remove Job's suffering, yet it altered the space around it. They did not rush to explain or correct. They did not search for causes or offer answers. They simply remained. In doing so, they honoured the weight of what had happened. Silence became an act of compassion. Job did not need words in those days. His body still ached, and loss still surrounded him. The quiet allowed his grief to exist without being shaped or challenged. It gave room for sorrow to breathe. The ashes beneath him remained, and the earth around them stayed still, holding the moment without interruption. The friends' silence also spoke of restraint. They understood that speech can wound when it arrives too quickly. By waiting, they showed reverence for the depth of Job's pain. Their stillness matched his stillness, and their patience reflected the seriousness of the moment. Time moved slowly as they sat together. Days and nights passed without distinction. No one counted the hours. The world beyond their small circle continued as always, yet within that space everything paused. The story itself seemed to rest, allowing the weight of loss, faith, and unanswered questions to settle gently. In this pause, there was no resolution and no direction, only presence, only shared silence. The moment did not demand understanding. It asked only for endurance and attention. The friends remained seated, Job remained among the ashes, and the quiet held them all. The power of that silence lay in what it did not attempt to do. It did not explain suffering. It did not lessen pain. It did not promise relief. It acknowledged reality without resistance. In this way, it became a form of care more fitting than words. The narrative slowed here, not to escape what had happened, but to honour it. The weight of the moment was allowed to rest, unspoken and undisturbed. Nothing was forced forward, nothing was drawn to a close. The stillness remained, inviting reflection without urgency, as Job and those who sat with him shared the quiet that suffering often requires. Within the stillness that followed, the story offered quiet lessons for hearts made weary by waiting and loss. Nothing in what had unfolded suggested that faith could shield a person from sorrow. Job remained faithful. Yet grief and pain had entered his life without restraint. The presence of suffering did not mean that faith had failed. It revealed that faith and sorrow often walk side by side. Faith did not remove Job's losses, nor did it heal his body in that moment. Instead, it gave shape to how he endured. It allowed him to remain anchored when everything familiar had been taken away. Meaning did not come through explanation but through posture. He remained oriented toward God even when answers were withheld. The story also showed that faithful people speak from pain. Words spoken in anguish are not always expressions of rebellion. Job's wife spoke from a place of exhaustion and grief, shaped by experiences that had broken her sense of safety. Her words reflected the strain placed upon her faith, not the absence of it. Pain had narrowed her vision, as it often does when suffering continues without relief. In this, the narrative made room for human weakness. It did not present sorrow as something easily managed or neatly resolved. It acknowledged that faith can falter under pressure, and that questions may rise even in hearts that once trusted without hesitation. Weakness was not hidden or corrected immediately. It was allowed to appear. God's patience with this weakness remained evident throughout. There was no swift judgment upon Job's wife for her words. There was no withdrawal of presence from Job because of his suffering. The silence from heaven was not absence but restraint. God didn't rush to explain or justify. He allowed space for endurance to form. This patience revealed something gentle and enduring. God did not demand perfect speech from those in pain. He did not require that grief be expressed carefully or without struggle. He allowed human frailty to exist within the bounds of his sovereignty. In doing so, he showed that faith is not measured by the absence of questions, but by the refusal to turn away entirely. Resting in trust without answers emerged as a quiet theme. Job did not understand why his life had been undone. His friend sat with him in silence, offering no resolution. The story paused without explanation. Trust was not rewarded with clarity, but with the ability to remain present. This kind of trust did not ask for immediate relief. It did not demand understanding. It rested in the knowledge that God remained who he had always been, even when circumstances suggested otherwise. Trust became an act of rest rather than effort, a settling into what could not be controlled. For the weary soul, this lesson spoke gently. It suggested that rest is possible even when pain continues. It offered permission to stop striving for answers that do not come quickly. It affirmed that faith can remain intact even when sorrow feels overwhelming. In the quiet that surrounded Job and those with him, meaning was not delivered in words. It was carried in endurance, patience, and presence. The story didn't hurry toward resolution. It allowed weariness to exist without shame and trust to remain without explanation. The quiet wisdom of this story settles easily into the concerns carried through ordinary days and into the hours of night. Many lives hold struggles that are unseen, losses that are not spoken aloud, and questions that linger without reply. The account of Job and his household does not belong only to ancient time. It rests gently beside modern hearts that grow tired beneath private burdens. Some troubles arrive without warning and remain longer than expected. They touch health, relationships, work, or the quiet sense of safety once taken for granted. Like Job, many discover that faith does not prevent these moments. Instead, it becomes something held quietly within them as they continue through days that feel heavier than before. The story offers permission to rest without resolving every question. It suggests that understanding is not required before peace can begin to form. The need to explain everything can exhaust the mind and trouble the heart. Here, rest is not found in answers but in release. The night does not ask for clarity, it invites stillness. God's nearness in suffering appears not through loud reassurance, but through presence that does not withdraw. Even when heaven is silent, God is not distant. His patience remains steady and unhurried. The quiet that surrounds suffering is not abandonment, but space. Space to breathe, space to endure, space to be held without being corrected. In the story, silence became a place where grief could rest without pressure. That same silence can exist now. It can surround weary thoughts and slow them until they no longer demand resolution. The heart does not need to carry every worry through the night. It can lay them down without fear that they will be lost or forgotten. Release does not mean forgetting. It means trusting that what cannot be managed in wakefulness does not need attention in rest. The burdens of the day may return, but they do not need to remain present in these quiet hours. Like Job seated among ashes, there can be stillness even when circumstances have not changed. The story encourages a gentle loosening of control. It allows concern to soften and thought to slow. Faith here is not effort, but yielding. Yielding to the knowledge that God remains attentive even when human strength fades. Yielding to rest as an act of trust rather than avoidance. As the night deepens, the lessons of endurance and patience settle quietly. They do not press or persuade. They simply remain available. The presence of God does not depend on understanding or progress. It rests near the broken and the tired, near those who wait and those who question. In this space, worry can be released without explanation. The mind can become still without reaching conclusions. The heart can rest without proving anything. Like the silence shared by Job and his friends, this moment holds no demand. It offers only quiet companionship, allowing the weight of the day to ease gently into stillness.